Assalamu alaikum jami'an. Welcome, guests. Today we're going to talk about leveraging technology for the greener good. We have 51 billion tons of greenhouse emissions. We need to reach zero. And in order to do that, we need to empower youth and have a paradigm shift in how we're leveraging green technology that is targeted to be a $1 trillion industry. It took us 50 years to use solar power to empower our calculators, and today we're empowering machines. And today we have advanced technologies right in our pockets. So, Khizr, I'll start off the conversation with you. How can we empower youth to leverage green technology for the greener good?
I think it's a great question, and it's a question that is on everybody's mind today, since we're addressing the youth. But before we start and get into the meat of the conversation, I would like the audience to ask a few questions. And maybe we can have a raise of hands on the questions that I ask. So how many people here today came to the venue using a bicycle? Any raise of hands for bicycles? No raise of hands. One raise of hand. OK.
Two.
Oh, we have a couple of raise of hands. Great. Three. Amazing. Any raise of hands for walking? Yeah, a couple of raise of hands for walking. 4, 5. And how many people came in a car? OK, that's the majority of us, including me. So I'll raise my hand as well. We're also participating. So I guess that, that's the point. I mean, it's visible and it's in front of us. The solutions are fairly straightforward. The technologies are available. We can walk to our destinations. We can take cycles to our destinations. But we choose to sit in a car and get from point A to point B. And why do we do that? Because it's convenient. Because it's the status quo. It's the way things are moving. And one of the things that we can do to begin to change our behavior and alter the way that we interact and engage with the planet is to be mindful of our own personal emissions. What sort of impact are we having on the planet when we sit in an SUV as opposed to an electric vehicle? Or if we sit in a car as opposed to a bicycle, or bicycle as opposed to walking. And so I would imagine that many of you are already sort of measuring or keeping tabs on your calorie intakes, for example, right? And I think it's even part of the, it's mandated by law in Saudi Arabia for restaurants to actually put it down on menus, the number of calories for the different meals that you consume. So imagine if you could do the same for emissions. Imagine that at the end of the day, if an app was telling you that today, through your activities, you have released these many emissions into the atmosphere, and you had a budget to work with, you would be able to alter your behavior. You would be able to more meaningfully engage with the planet that you inhabit. So I think that's the starting point that I would like to make on the question that you raised. And of course, I mean, there's so many facets to the discussion that I'm sure we'll get into with the panel.
Definitely, and I like the notion of how we count our calories when we're eating. We can also count our emissions using technology. And Tariq, I'll take the conversation to you. You always have a mantra about how you want to have a people-planet perspective.
Yes.
And I'll ask you, how can we design the green technologies of the future while taking nature in mind?
So I'd like to start, well, one, to firstly congratulate the Kingdom's leadership on the groundbreaking announcements, and particularly the congratulations to young people who I heard really pushed the mark and the envelope for really what was possible in the announcements made. And really what I heard yesterday was in really tackling this triple crisis of climate, biodiversity, and pollution, we need a triple approach of solutions, which for me is AI, it's HI, and it's BI. So that's artificial intelligence, that's human intelligence, so that's our emotional intelligence, our innovation, our creativity as young people, and that's BI, which is biological intelligence. And for me, biological intelligence is really learning from nature's technologies. So for me, when we look at concepts like the carbon circular economy, which is a huge and complex topic, the best way for a young person to learn about CCE is from the ultimate carbon circular economy, which is nature, which is a $100 trillion economy of ecosystem services, which is zero waste, which has zero carbon global travel, and which provides the conditions conducive for all of life. When we look at the SGI goal of planting 10 billion trees, which is an incredible mark, we look at trees from the perspective of technology. Trees are really these self-replicating solar-powered machines that are able to synthesize carbon dioxide and water to create sturdy building materials that really provide the conditions conducive for all of life. And that's really incredible when you start to think about looking at nature as a technology. And for me, it helps us to become more biologically literate. It helps us when we're able to look at what are the species for Riyadh, what are the species in the Gulf that are able to survive and thrive, and how can we learn from those technologies? And that includes, as my final point, on things like food security. There's a great food security emphasis on SGI. And we can look at species such as bees, for example, and we can harvest honey from bees. But really, what you can look at bees also as they visit 4 billion data points a year, one single hive. That's 4 billion data points. That's 4 billion flowers that they're able to visit per year. And we think about harvesting just honey, but we can actually harvest data. We can think of bees as data partners. Yeah. And for me, this kind of approach of not just learning about nature, but really learning from nature, really studying nature's technologies, studying nature as a partner, really helps us to be able to think how we can harness our HI and our AI for good for humans and planet.
And I think that's an important takeaway. Biological intelligence is not something we always keep in mind. We think of artificial intelligence, we think about the new fourth industrial revolution technologies, but biological intelligence is a new concept that we need to take into account about using nature as our own R&D department. And I'll shift the conversation to Mohammed. MashaAllah, I think youth as a default today are youth savvy from the get-go, so they don't really need to be taught. They need to be empowered. So you have a great story how you were empowered with your tech-savvy background to make a change in our green technology and also the environmental challenges.
Sure. I believe that the youth are tech-savvy. And I'm sure each one of you, when you were kids, you were playing with your computers and learning new stuff. And that gives us an advantage as young individuals. And we learn how to navigate through technology since we were kids, and that gives us an advantage over our previous generation. And we're not only that, the youth are entrepreneurial in their mindset, and they can work anywhere and everywhere. They don't need an office. They can work in coffee shops, and they can work at home in their pajamas. And that's the power of the youth, and this is why the country or this nation is empowering us. And this initiative and this forum or this summit is an excellent example of youth empowerment. And I believe that if you let the youth be, they can surprise you of what they can do. Honestly, my initiative or my startup, NABATIK, which we started just recently, was a result of the empowerment of our leadership. We leveraged our knowledge, knowing about technology. We used this advantage, and we built a platform that is based on technology, and we got the support from our leadership. And that's why I'm standing here in front of you to scale this up and to make a big impact.
MashaAllah. And there's definitely many, many examples about Saudi youth leveraging technology and doing a great impact on the environment. Now let me shift the conversation more to the biggest platform for youth, which is social media. And there's two very important numbers we need to take into account. 67% of youth talk about environmental challenges on average every 2 weeks. However, 32% only take action on the social media level and also on the ground level, We need to do a paradigm shift as well about the conversations taken on our social media platforms. And Khizr, you have an interesting point to deliver about how we're interacting today and the conversations we're having.
Yeah, so it's, I think that if there's a disconnect between the kind of communication that you're receiving about a solution and the tangible solution itself, it's not going to happen. It's going to create more anxiety as opposed to an actionable step. And just going back to the example that I started off with, when I asked you all how many people came here on a bicycle, how many people came here in a car, yeah, fine. The solution is a bicycle. You can reduce your emissions by using one, but are you going to use one in 40 degrees Celsius in the summer? No. Are you going to sit on a bicycle and come to an event, to a social event? Probably not. And so the solution is very simple, but it's also not very simple. Perhaps in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, if you actually wanted the youth to start using bicycles, maybe you would need an innovation of the kind where you would be using a dynamo and some solar power to create a capsule bicycle that was air-conditioned and covered at the same time, right? I mean, maybe you'd have to come up with something like that. And that is the kind of innovation that is required to bridge the gap between, current solutions and current challenges, because the current solutions don't really meet the challenges perfectly. And that's the opportunity sort of space between existing solutions and challenges. So, I mean, going back to social media, unfortunately, the communication on social media is not very helpful because it's inducing anxiety because there's a disconnect between the solution and the challenge. And so I think something that we can do to, help ourselves release some of that stress, release some of that anxiety, is to think about, the gap between those two things, and to think about the innovations that we can invest our time and efforts and money in to bridge the gap, and to actually move forward on those tangible actions that are so very much needed at this point in time.
And I like that. I think what you're trying to say is that there's a lack of tangible actions communicated through social media. And that increases the anxiety because I, as a youth, want to do something. However, I cannot do that tangible action that you're suggesting. And that just increases the pressure on me, the anxiety that I'm dealing with. And eventually, I'm just going to be polarized away from the conversation rather than jump in. And including to the tangible actions, we have the whole complexity of it all. And Tariq, you have an interesting look at social media. You want to use it to increase technical, environmental literacy. And how would you want to approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll build on Khizr's point actually around anxiety. So I had the honor to work with thousands and thousands of youth advocates in the Gulf region. And what I've seen as a trend is obviously there's a deep care for the environment. And we saw that in the stories yesterday from many of the esteemed leaders saying that it was their sons and daughters pushing them to take action. But also, often that sense of responsibility comes from that anxiety. There's some recent scientific reports that say that 75% of young people are fearful about the future. And that in the majority of young people, when we think about climate change, it promotes a sense of anxiety, sadness, hopelessness. I'm from Bahrain, and when we talk about climate change, the first question that we get from young people is our island going to survive? And when we're talking about those stories on social media, it's very difficult for someone to really take that in. And if we just keep stories to that kind of despair, it's not going to be very effective. But if you combine saying, yes, we acknowledge that it's a challenge, but these things that we're talking about and potential impacts are not inevitable. I think that's what we need to really emphasize. We talk about a potential projected future, that we as young people, the best antidote to anxiety is action. And that's why I talked about nature really as a source, because when you look at nature around us, nature has achieved the SDGs, of course, far longer than we have. But there's such a wellspring of innovation that surrounds us that we can learn from, and it gives a lot of hope. And for me, that literacy one starts from turning that anxiety into action, and also, as mentioned from the previous panel, and really being open to the complexity of it. What we are talking about really in these issues, these concepts, even these last 3 hours, is a whole PhD dissertation. And I think for me, and when we use social media, it's not just about the clickbait, so we speak, but really telling the stories that we're able to educate each other, we're able to connect as young people to go into the complexity of our stories and also our emotions.
Definitely, and I think that's a takeaway for everyone here in the audience and watching online, that if you are really hopeful about doing something for the environment, focus on educating yourself on all the complexity that it has on the background. And I'll shift the conversation to Mohammed, and now we talked about tangible actions, we spoke about the literacy involved, but I think we need to also talk about the language needed. I think the conversations today were about environment. It's too technical, it's too corporate, it's not youthful. And I think I'll lead the question to you, Mohammed, to answer how do you want the conversation to be?
Sure, but before I answer your question, as we were talking, I remember a story that my father told me before we come here. It's about a young girl, a child that was walking with her mother back from school. And as they were walking, they saw a group of crowd gathering, and they seemed to be trouble there. So they went and they swept through the crowd, and they found a truck stuck under a bridge. And there was police, ambulance, and everyone seems to be talking about how they can solve this challenge. And they came to a consensus that they need to cut part of the bridge so that the truck can be released. So the little girl asked her mother, "Mom, what's going on here?" She bowed down and she explained it to her that this truck is stuck and they need to release it, and they came to a consensus that they need to cut part of the bridge. And then she said, "But Mom, why don't they just flat out the tire and the truck will go down and they can release it?" So the mother told the policeman, and they said it's worth a try. And they did flat out the tire, and the truck went down, and it got released. And the problem was solved. They didn't need to cut down the bridge. It's the most effective solution of all. The moral of this story is that sometimes solutions come from the most unexpected people. And this is why we should change the narrative in the social media, change the tone of our challenges, and speak in a more youthful tone. Speak to our youth. You will be surprised of what they have to say. Because when they see big numbers and when they see big challenges, technical terms, they feel like they're fighting a big monster and they don't have the tool to combat it. And that's the challenge. But if we break it down to smaller challenges in a more clear way, you will have focus from the youth, and they will solve those problems.
Definitely. And I guess we also know that if you want youth to be involved into the conversation, they need to be part of the conversation with their own language. And that's a huge takeaway for today. And I guess we had a huge amount of information. I myself was very educated by my guests today, and I'm honored to be within them today. And I would like to give the chance for everyone to give one strong message and a concept, to give it to the youth of today to create the solutions of tomorrow for our green, or the greener good. But I'll start with Khizr again.
So I'm constantly inspired by people working in this space. I mean, Mohammed, Tariq, yourself. I mean, it's a pleasure to connect with you all and actually talk about solutions. I feel like the solution has to be local. It has to be indigenous. For Riyadh, the solution has to be developed in Riyadh from the people of Riyadh. And so you can't really import something from another country and say, let's do this over here. And so I think it's within us to find that, to find the problem that we obsess about, to find a solution to that problem, and to chase it. So, I mean, that's my message, to think local, there's inspiration all over the world, but I think the solution is here. For problems that are here, the solutions are also over here.
Okay. And Tariq, what would your closing statement and a message to the youth be today?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's when we're looking at solutions, let nature be your teacher, your lesson, your classroom, and your book, for one. And I'd also invite you to really step into the complexity. Step into the complexity of these concepts, step into the complexity of these conversations. And one of the best ways to do that sometimes is not jumping immediately to the answer, because that can also be very overwhelming. It's actually learning how to ask deeper questions, better questions, asking questions of each other. And I know you have an opportunity to do that right after this session in the workshop. And I invite you to start there. And also in the complexity of all that you're feeling in your emotions about climate change, and to channel that into activism, into advocacy, into action, really wherever you are in whatever profession that you're in.
I like that. So let's increase the questions rather than push the answers. And Mohammed, I think I will end with you. What's your message to the youth? Your experience and your story is inspiring, and I think we'll have more youth going towards your pathway too.
Well, I agree with both of your points, Khizr or Tariq. I believe that big challenges can be solved by small actions of few. So I invite you all to take a pledge today to be one of those few that take small action to make the biggest impact. And I cannot stress how much this is important. Each one of you has a role in society, has a role in solving the bigger challenge, and I'm sure that each one of you are up to the challenge. That's all I have to give.
MashaAllah. And I guess with the end of the session, we need to focus on the key takeaways today. So if you really want to be involved in solving these environmental challenges, you really need to be educated. You need to dive into the complexity, as Tariq said. And you need to also start asking questions. You need to be more aware rather than what your baseline awareness is. It's more complex than what it seems. And if you want to do a change, you need to think locally and act globally, as Khizr said. You can't bring a solution from the outside and bring it back here. It's not going to adapt well. It needs to adapt to the community, the culture, and the environment around it. So it's up to you to make a solution for us locally. And finally, big problems are solved by many small actions. And I think Mohammed articulated that very beautifully. And I am sure that everyone here is energized and inspired to do more. If you allow me, I'll just finish with my own closing statement. We grew up hearing about the gold rush and how the gold rush was the biggest opportunity for anyone to do their dreams and their aspirations. It was a time for opportunity. Today, I believe we're living in the green rush. Thank you so much. And I thank my special and honored guest again. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.